Everyone thinks they know Alcatraz Island. Bars, cells, no escape. That's the movie version. But rewind the timeline, and the island looks completely different. Picture soldiers marching across bare rock, boots echoing, hauling heavy cannons into position while scanning the foggy horizon. This place wasn't built to cage criminals. It was built to scare enemies away. The island's job was simple: control the bay or lose the West. No prisoners, just power. As years passed, the world changed faster than Alcatraz could keep up. New weapons made coastal cannons useless. No invasions came. The soldiers left. The fort sat quiet, decaying, watching ships pass by without purpose. Empty buildings, rusted guns, wind howling through abandoned barracks. And that's the dangerous moment in history, when powerful infrastructure has no job. Because unused power never stays unused for long. Then the switch happened. Slowly, deliberately. Guards replaced soldiers. Cells replaced cannons. The same isolation that once protected the coast was repurposed to break people mentally. Boats arrive carrying prisoners in chains. Gates slam shut. Concrete walls rise higher. Water surrounds everything. Alcatraz didn't need tall fences. Nature did the guarding. The prison wasn't just holding inmates. It was broadcasting a warning to the entire country. This is the part history rarely explains properly. Alcatraz didn't evolve because it was efficient. It evolved because it was symbolic. Fear works better than walls. Reputation works better than guards. And that's why this island still lives rent-free in our culture today. On History of Questions, we don't just ask what happened. We ask why this place, why this moment, and why fear became the final architecture. This rock looks random until you zoom out. Alcatraz Island sits right in the middle of San Francisco Bay, like a choke point. Ships coming in had to pass it. Ships going out had to pass it. Control the rock, and you control the movement. That's not poetry, that's military math. Geography decided Alcatraz's fate long before humans argued about it. The island wasn't important because of what was built on it. It was important because of where it was stuck. In the 1800s, the West wasn't secure. It was vulnerable. Gold brought people. People brought enemies. And the U.S. military was terrified of losing access to the Pacific. Alcatraz became a giant do-not-touch sign. Cannons were aimed outward. Soldiers watched the water nonstop. The island wasn't defensive in a quiet way. It was aggressive without firing a shot. Just existing there was enough to make other powers think twice. But there's another layer people miss. Isolation. Even before prisons entered the conversation, this island already felt cut off. Cold water, strong currents, fog that erased the city just a mile away. That psychological distance mattered. It made Alcatraz feel unreachable, detached, final. Long before inmates were shipped here, the island was already training people to associate it with separation and no return. That feeling came first. The prison came later. This is why the island mattered so much. Not because it was strong, but because it felt unavoidable. Geography created control. Isolation created fear. Everything else was built on top of that foundation. And this is exactly why History of Questions exists, to show that history isn't random. The land chooses the story first. Humans just follow. In the 1800s, America was nervous. Not movie nervous, real nervous. Empires were expanding, navies were flexing, and the Pacific suddenly mattered. The West Coast was new, rich, and exposed. Gold meant attention, and attention meant threat. So the question wasn't if someone might attack, it was from where. Fear didn't whisper back then. It built things. And one of the things it built was Alcatraz, turned into a watchful eye staring straight into the ocean. That's why coastal fortifications mattered so much. Before satellites, before radar, land was defense. Cannons were positioned not for battle, but for deterrence. Alcatraz became a floating threat. Heavy guns aimed outward. Soldiers pacing stone paths. flags snapping in the wind. The message was simple: we're watching. The island didn't need to fire. Its existence was the warning. Power back, then wasn't quiet, it was visible, loud, and meant to be seen from miles away. And this is the part people forget. Alcatraz wasn't built to punish. It was built to stay awake. It symbolized vigilance, not cruelty. A constant reminder that the coast was guarded, that someone was always watching the horizon. Only later did fear change direction, from enemies outside to people inside. On History of Questions, this is where the story gets interesting, because when a place built for defense loses its enemy, it starts looking for a new one. In the 1800s, America was nervous. Not movie nervous, real nervous. Empires were expanding, navies were flexing, and the Pacific suddenly mattered. The West Coast was new, rich, and exposed. Gold meant attention, and attention meant threat. So the question wasn't if someone might attack, it was from where. Fear didn't whisper back then. It built things. And one of the things it built was Alcatraz, turned into a watchful eye staring straight into the ocean. That's why coastal fortifications mattered so much. Before satellites, before radar, land was defense. Cannons were positioned not for battle, but for deterrence. Alcatraz became a floating threat. Heavy guns aimed outward, soldiers pacing stone paths, flags snapping in the wind. The message was simple: we're watching. The island didn't need to fire. Its existence was the warning. Power back, then wasn't quiet, it was visible, loud, and meant to be seen from miles away. And this is the part people forget. Alcatraz wasn't built to punish. It was built to stay awake. It symbolized vigilance, not cruelty. A constant reminder that the coast was guarded, that someone was always watching the horizon. Only later did fear change direction, from enemies outside to people inside. On History of Questions, this is where the story gets interesting, because when a place built for defense loses its enemy, it starts looking for a new one. Alcatraz, before bars and cells, looked like pure military muscle. Alcatraz Island was stacked with cannons, stone walls, guard towers, and rough wooden barracks. Soldiers lived there full time. They woke up to fog, drills, and the sound of metal being dragged across rock. The island felt busy, tense, alert. Nothing about it said prison. It said stand ready. This was a place built to respond fast, not to hold people still. Daily life was strict but functional. Soldiers trained, repaired weapons, cleaned equipment, and watched the water constantly. Barracks were simple, cramped, and cold. No comfort, no beauty, just purpose. The island itself did most of the work. Strong currents, freezing water, and distance from the mainland made it feel sealed off. Back then, that isolation meant safety. It was why the island was considered nearly untouchable. Getting close without being seen was almost impossible. Here's the irony that makes this part hit harder. For all its cannons, drills, and preparation, Alcatraz never fired a single shot in battle. Not once. All that power existed purely as a threat, a warning, a psychological wall built from stone and fear. And that's why we talk about it on History of Questions. Because the most powerful structures in history often succeed without ever being used. They just need to be believed. Technology doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up and makes things embarrassing. 1 minute, Alcatraz is stacked with cannons and soldiers, the ultimate coastal flex. The next minute, warfare changes. Ships can fire from farther away. Weapons get more accurate. Explosives get stronger. Suddenly, those massive cannons aimed at the bay feel outdated, like guarding a vault with a wooden stick. The island didn't move, but the world did. That's when the real problem appeared. The government looked at this cold, isolated, already intimidating island and asked the most dangerous question in infrastructure history. What do we do with this place now? You don't demolish something like Alcatraz. You repurpose it. And isolation, once meant to stop enemies, suddenly looked perfect for stopping people. On History of Questions, this is the exact moment where defense quietly turns into detention. The shift didn't come with an announcement. No grand reopening. No dramatic speech. One day Alcatraz was guarding the coast, and the next it was guarding people. Same island, same isolation, different target. Alcatraz Island didn't need to be redesigned to become a prison. It already had the perfect ingredients: distance, cold water, limited exits, and a reputation that made people uneasy before they even arrived. The first prisoners weren't famous criminals. They were military men, soldiers who disobeyed orders, men who broke rules. Discipline cases. Alcatraz became a place to send people who needed to be corrected, isolated, and reminded who was in control. Prisoners arrived by boat, watched closely, marched through heavy doors. No cheers, no crowds, just silence and authority. This wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about obedience. Life inside was controlled down to the minute. Where to stand, when to eat, when to sleep. Punishment wasn't loud, it was quiet. Isolation, repetition, rules stacked on rules. The island itself became part of the discipline. You could see the city across the water, close enough to feel cruel, far enough to be unreachable. That's when Alcatraz started developing its psychological edge. Not pain, pressure. This is the moment everything clicks. The island didn't change much, but its meaning did. Defense turned inward. Power stopped pointing outward. And once fear proved it could control soldiers, the government realized it could control anyone. That's why this phase matters so much on History of Questions. Because before Alcatraz became America's most famous prison, it learned how to break people quietly. Isolation did most of the work long before the prison ever looked scary. Alcatraz Island didn't need high walls or electric fences. The location was the weapon. Cold water, strong currents, constant wind. Even standing on the island made people feel cut off. You weren't just locked in, you were surrounded. And your brain understood that immediately. The water mattered more than any wall ever could. Swimming wasn't just hard, it felt suicidal. Freezing temperatures, unpredictable tides, distance that looked short but lied to you. Prisoners could see the city lights at night, close enough to feel cruel. That sight wasn't hope, it was torture. The island constantly reminded you how close freedom was, and how unreachable it stayed. This is where Alcatraz's reputation started forming. Not through brutality, but through inevitability. Guards didn't need to shout. The island whispered instead. Stories spread fast. No one escapes. The water will get you. Fear started policing behavior before guards even stepped in. By the time inmates arrived, their minds were already halfway locked. That's the shift that matters most. Control stopped being physical and became mental. The island didn't chase prisoners, it waited. And fear did the guarding. This is exactly why History of Questions focuses on moments like this, because the most effective prisons in history weren't built with force first. They were built with geography, silence, and belief. By the 1930s, America wasn't just struggling, it was cracking. Banks collapsed, jobs vanished, lines for bread wrapped around city blocks. People were angry, scared, and looking for someone to blame. Crime didn't just rise, it filled the vacuum. Gangsters became celebrities. Robberies felt constant. The government looked weak, and weakness was the one thing the public refused to tolerate anymore. This was the era of organized crime going full boss mode. Criminals weren't hiding anymore, they were flexing. Fancy suits, fast cars, headlines with nicknames instead of names. To everyday people barely surviving, it felt like criminals were winning while everyone else paid the price. Fear turned into rage, and rage demanded consequences. Not quiet prisons, not rehabilitation talk. People wanted examples. That's when the government realized something critical. They didn't just need places to lock people up. They needed a symbol, something cold, something final, somewhere that screamed, if you cross the line, this is where you disappear. And sitting right there in San Francisco Bay was the perfect candidate, Alcatraz Island. already isolated, already feared, already expensive enough to feel serious. Alcatraz wasn't chosen because it was humane or efficient. It was chosen because it felt inevitable. The government needed to regain authority fast, and fear was the fastest currency available. On History of Questions, this is the turning point we always slow down on. Because when a country stops asking how to fix problems and starts asking how to scare people straight, places like Alcatraz stop being buildings and start becoming messages. The decision to turn Alcatraz Island into a federal prison wasn't about saving money. In fact, it cost more to run than almost any other prison in America. Food had to be shipped in. Water had to be shipped in. Fuel, supplies, everything came by boat. On paper, it made no sense. But this wasn't a budget decision. It was a psychological one. The government wasn't buying efficiency. It was buying fear. Isolation did the heavy lifting. The cold water, the distance, the fog, the silence. Alcatraz didn't need extra walls or brutal guards. Nature handled that. Pair that isolation with the island's growing reputation, and you get something more powerful than steel bars. Inevitability. Prisoners sent their already believed escape was impossible. That belief was the real lock. This is where the idea of sending a message comes in. Alcatraz wasn't built for normal inmates. It was for rule breakers, men who caused trouble in other prisons, the ones guards couldn't control. Sending someone to Alcatraz wasn't just punishment. It was a warning broadcast to every other prison in the country. Behave or you go here. Fear traveled faster than paperwork. And here's the part most people misunderstand. Escape stories weren't a failure. They were useful. Every failed attempt reinforced the myth. Cold water, strong currents, disappearing bodies. The story wasn't someone almost made it. The story was don't even try. On History of Questions, this is the moment we underline, because Alcatraz didn't rely on walls to work. It relied on stories people told themselves long before they ever stepped onto the island. So here's the question that actually matters. If Alcatraz Island wasn't just a fort and wasn't just a prison, then what was it really for? Maybe Alcatraz isn't a relic of the past. Maybe it's a warning, a reminder of how fast protection turns into control and how easily fear becomes architecture. The island never changed location. People changed their needs. And every time society panics, places like this quietly make sense again. That's why we don't close the book here on History of Questions. Because the real danger isn't what Alcatraz was. It's how familiar its logic still feels.